So we'll start off with, I mean, I'm biased, but we'll start off with what I think is the most, maybe not notable, because obviously with the news that came out just today, which we'll get to, there's maybe a more legendary, more tenured coach that um, just stepped down from the position, got fired, whatever, however they want to phrase it. So maybe not the most notable, but I think the most surprising. And with that, we're going to start with Pete Carroll. Not necessarily getting fired, but moving up to an advisory role, leaving the head coach role vacant. I'll throw it over to you, Josh, in terms of what you think about that and what that means for the Seahawks.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of Seahawks fans in my life personally. It didn't seem like a shock to Seahawks fans. I think it kind of seemed more of a shock to us outside of the 12th man and the Seattle area. Talking to Seahawks fans, that conversation had gone consistently. Being in the media, Seahawks fans like, so what's the Pete Carroll buzz? I'm like, what are you talking about? But apparently within Seahawks circles and Reddit and whatnot, that had been going on for a while. You keep on hearing, oh, he still wants the coach. But I don't know if this is like a Brad Stevens level thing where, Brad Stevens left the Celtics and then became a really good GM and president for the Celtics. I think Pete can still do that. Remember, too, and I'm sure you know this, Caleb, too, there potentially still could be a sale for the Seahawks in the next 5 years here. So they don't want things to look unstable within the organization. They want to make sure things look good and healthy. And I think that's why you haven't heard a lot of names going around. You've heard Dan Quinn. There's been some, I'm sure we're going to mention Ben Johnson's for everybody's name in here, except for like maybe two for Ben Johnson. He seems to be sprinkled in everywhere. Dan Quinn seems safe. He's with the Legion of Boom. He knows that organization. That seems to be where they're going. Carroll, great career there, obviously. Seems like he still wants to coach. We'll see what happens. Probably should have 2 Super Bowls. Definitely should probably have 2 Super Bowls. Sorry, Caleb. But, it's sad to see him go and not have another one of that. The Seahawks, the one thing he did with the Seahawks when he left the Trojans is he made the Seahawks a relevant contender year after year. You look at those 14 years, the Seahawks were a team that was just kind of there. He didn't really think about the Seahawks as much, and he turned the Seahawks into a year-round, at least playoff contender. So it's going to be really hard to replace that.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, this news really hit me this week, and I know, Simon, you were saying before the pod, expecting me to be mad either way that Pete Carroll's going to get mad, either mad that he got fired or whatever. It seems like I'm always mad at this team nowadays. But like you said, Josh, it isn't exactly that big of a surprise because it's something that not only has kind of been in the minds of Seahawks fans this year, but it's honestly been a bit of a longer conversation. Because even going back to before the Russell Wilson trade, a big aspect of that was who are they going to let essentially run the organization? Is it going to be a Pete-focused team where you build around defense and the running game and the kind of style that he likes to play? Or are you going to metaphorically let Russ cook and let him kind of run the show, which is what we saw in that a couple of years before Russ left, where they really let that style play out and it kind of fell off the rails. And obviously the Seahawks went with Pete Carroll trading Russell Wilson away, ended up being a good move for them. But the most important thing I think to realize with why they let go of him is because this defense has not been good for a very long time. And I think that flies under the radar just because of how good those defenses were historically, especially in those, not just in the Super Bowl years, but before the Legion of Boom dissolved. They were still fantastic up until about 2016, 2017. And it's just been terrible. And you've seen that especially in these last couple of games. The Seahawks had a wide open path to the playoffs, and it was their defense that let them down. Terrible rush defense against the Steelers, terrible rush defense against the Cardinals. It was one of the most, as someone who has watched the team for 10 years, it was some of the most embarrassing football I've ever seen them play. And it's just like that, when you are a defensive-minded coach, that kind of stuff can't fly. And it's something we've been seeing year after year, because the Seahawks have been cycling through defensive coordinators. You had, after you had Gus Bradley and all the guys who ran the Legion of Boom, Dan Quinn, possible head coach in Canada for them, another one. you start to see them run through guys who have like 1 to 2 year runs. Clint Hurt has been there a couple years. He's probably going to leave. Ken Norton Jr. was another one. And it seems like each year, like I'm being part of the Seahawks fandom and seeing it, it's like this guy's the problem. This defensive coordinator is the problem. Our defense is terrible, but removing this guy is how we're going to get better. Or removing Clint Hurt is how we're going to get better. And eventually you have to look up to Pete and say, you're the defensive guy. Why is this not improving? That's kind of where the solution needs to come from. But
yeah, I agree with you. Like the secondary is great, you know, with getting Woolen and having Witherspoon, who may have edged out Jalen Carter for Rookie of the Year potentially down the stretch. Great pick there. Taking him, Kobe Bryant back there, Mike Jackson. The secondary is good, but like you mentioned, off the edge and that pass rush and the linebackers and the middle linebackers. When I brought up Frank Clark, I'm like, okay, cool, and he was a huge disappointment for them. They made a big mid-season trade to help out that linebacking core. Didn't really help. So when you have, like you said, a defensive coordinated-minded coach there, that's something you have to fix. And it seems like they're going to bring in a defensive-minded coach in Dan Quinn, if not maybe Mike Vrabel, who are two defensive-minded coaches. So on their minds, whoever they do bring in, it'll obviously be centered around the defense because the offense is good. My question to you is, I pitched this to a few Seahawks fans, and some of them seem lukewarm on it. Some of them seem okay with it. Some of them kind of like the idea. Quarterback position is a questionable position right now for them. Geno has that contract, but it's not that hard to get out of it. I'm not bringing up the bring Russ back stuff. I look at the Commanders, for example, and I look at a guy like Sam Howell, who will not be the quarterback of this team most likely next year because it looks like Drake May will more than likely be the Commanders' quarterback. Would you be opposed at them throwing a 4th or 5th round pick to Sam Howell to potentially be the quarterback, or a guy like that, or do you want to roll back next year with Geno?
yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, as a Seahawks fan, you're kind of just tired of the mediocrity. Like that's kind of where this team has been at. It's been, we had because like you said, Pete Carroll has made this team a team to respect for the last 14 years that he's been there, which means they've been consistently good. But since 2014, 2015, they haven't been great. It's been 10-6, 9-7, 9-8 now. And I think when you're looking at a guy like Howell, potentially bringing him in for the Seahawks, I think it really is kind of taking this young core that you've built and just kind of taking, I think, either kind of just a sideways, like it's not going to be any sort of improvement over Geno, I think. In terms of what I like for the quarterback of the future, I do think you ride it out with Geno. Like I do think Geno has shown enough to show that he is a good quarterback, and he has not been the problem with this team. Watching this team week after week, the offense has struggled. The offense has been slow, but I think more than anything, that has been offensive scheme. And I also think it's been offensive line issues because a lot of the time Geno does not have time to throw the football. And I think you kind of have to give him that extra year to ride it out. I wouldn't be opposed. I think if I'm John Schneider right now, my ultimate plan is to, after getting a new head coach in place, what direction they'll take with that remains to be seen. But in terms of quarterback, I'm keeping Geno that extra year, but I'm also trying to get a quarterback in either the late 1st round, early 2nd round, hopefully aiming for kind of like a Jalen Hurts situation, ideally, where you can let a guy sit behind.
Be there. JJ McCarthy will be there. Jordan Travis. There's guys there. I think a lot of people look at that top echelon of those 3 quarterbacks, but that back set of quarterbacks there, I guess Penix is kind of the 4th one there, but that back level of getting a JJ McCarthy or a Bo Nix, and you don't have to play them next year. You don't have to play a Bo Nix or a JJ McCarthy at all next year. You can let them learn under Geno.
And I was going to say that as well. I think that's an excellent idea. I was going to just field the question to both of you guys because the main thing that I keep on hearing whenever I hear people talk about this specifically is obviously they're not going to get a top 3 of whoever those top 3 quarterbacks in this draft are going to be. I'm curious.
Caleb, Drake May, and Jaden Daniels.
Right.
And then Penix to the next level.
Yeah, but if Seattle's not going to get that top 3, who would you like to see Seattle grab there out of those next couple? Because this is a really deep quarterback class, and like you mentioned, Josh, the Seahawks do not need to look for a starting caliber quarterback this season. You don't need a guy to slide in right away. Geno could be that guy to maybe mentor somebody this year. So I'm curious what both you guys think on who you'd like to see Seattle grab.
True.
Yeah, I think I think for me, I mean, I think my ideal situation is also kind of filled with a little bit of bias because as someone who's recently gotten into watching a lot of Washington Huskies football, it would be fantastic to see Michael Penix stay in Seattle because I think he's shown a lot, like the kind of chemistry that he's shown with Roma Dunze in terms of like the deep ball, like that he's able to throw, like that specific aspect of his game reminds me a lot of how Russ played back in Seattle in terms of just how accurate he is. It doesn't it, like I went to the game against Utah that they had. It didn't matter if Adunze was covered. Like he's throwing it up there and he's placing it right in the basket. And that's the kind of thing that Russ did with Lockett. And if I can see that kind of connection again, I would just love that. He's got and that kind of like quick release is another thing that, especially when you have offensive line issues, other than the last game against Michigan, and hasn't seemed any sort of pressure hasn't seemed to bother him all year. That's kind of my ideal situation. He may be a little bit high, like you kind of said, Josh. He's like after the top three, it's a pretty decent gap, but he is kind of, I think, that next guy up after that. So that's kind of my ideal situation. But I think honestly, any of these kind of next level guys would be great. And I think another good comparison I can draw to is how Jordan Love has developed with the Packers. I think the idea of sitting a quarterback behind a starter is one that a lot of teams need to do. And I think if the Seahawks do that this year and kind of use that as a springboard to potentially trying to be Super Bowl contenders again, that would be great for me as a Seahawks fan.
Well, Michael Penix is available. He will be a guy. I've seen him slip in drafts down to the 20th pick. It's not like it's a guy that you can't trade up for. Those top four players of going Caleb, Drake, Jaden Daniels, and Marvin, that seems to be locked in the top four, and we could talk about what the Bears will do with that in another day, but that top four is locked. But after that, Penix is a guy that will be available. And you know what? When the combine comes too, that could change. He could bump out maybe, one of these guys. I'm not going to get into it too much right now, but I have Penix, to me, as the second best quarterback in this draft. I have Caleb as the third best. I think I just haven't. I don't want to get too much into it because we have this stuff to talk about, but I just haven't seen Caleb Williams beat a top 15 defense yet. So I'm a little bit lower on him. I'm a little bit biased to notice I am a Carolina fan, but I have seen Drake May do things that teams look for and want from an NFL quarterback more, and Drake May checks those boxes, much like Michael Penix does. Yes, he struggled in the national championship game, but look what happened in that game. He just, O-line got destroyed. He had no room. But from what I've seen from Penix, that's the guy that's the crown jewel in this draft for me. That's the guy that has the highest upside. As much as I like Drake, and I think he can be the best quarterback, the sky's the limit for Penix. So a team like Seattle, a team like Atlanta we'll talk about, maybe my Raiders we're going to talk about in a bit too. Those are all teams that are going to be clamoring and trying to trade up for Penix because they know the Calebs, the Drakes, maybe the Jadens aren't going to be available for them. But for Seattle, a Penix would be there.
Yeah, and I think that is the ideal situation. And like you talked about, the Michigan game is really like the only red flag from this last season, in addition to kind of injury concerns from his past years at Indiana. But I think you also have to take into consideration he also looked very injured at the end of the Michigan game too, like holding his ribs. Like he did not look okay at the end of that game. So I almost think you throw that out the window a little bit, especially after the performance he had against Texas.
Like I said, I'll in the combine.
Yeah.